Good day, ladies and gentlemen, I am Breareus Kerensky and this is an unusual review, one for a video game I can actually understand. This is Dungeon Travelers 2, a dungeon crawler game published in America by Atlus. The first Dungeon Travelers was a spin-off of 2 Hard 2, a popular eroge by Aquaplus. Dungeon Travelers 2 sheds its links to other Aquaplus franchises and goes for a completely original setting and cast of characters. Like the first Dungeon Travelers and Tears to Tiara 2, Dungeon Travelers 2 is developed by Sting. Who is Sting, you might ask? Well, Sting is best known for the Depth Heaven series that comprises Riviera the Promised Land, Nights in the Nightmare, and one of my favorite Game Boy Advanced games, Yggdra Union. Other Sting titles include Baroque, the Evolution series, and Dokapon Kingdom. But enough about Sting, let's talk about the game at hand. Dungeon Travelers 2 puts you in the role of Fried, a Libra. Libra agents travel around the world to seal monsters. They cannot fight or cast spells, and so they are accompanied by someone who can. In Fried's case, 16 gorgeous-looking girls. Make no mistake, one of Dungeon Travelers 2's main selling point is the character design, and the Aquaplus team doesn't disappoint. At least for the main heroines. Fried's main portrait and a few illustrations about him don't quite live up to everyone else. All the girls you meet belong to a different class, from standard fighters and mages, or magic users as the game calls them, passing between the unusual spillers and dollmasters, to fan-servicey maids. Characters cannot change classes, but can move to more advanced classes as they grow in strength. Advanced classes work as improvement to base classes, so for example a sorceress retains all skills from the basic magic user class. Characters not in the party won't get any experience, and with 16 of them, someone will be left behind. One thing I don't like is that it takes quite some time to get a full party of 5 members, and until level 15, classes are fixed. You are given some degree of freedom to specialize someone in certain weapons, but the whole class system doesn't fully open quite late in the game, when multiple characters and thus classes to choose from are available. And it's a shame, because composing the party is the game's core, more than combat itself. Although some characters belong to the same class, there is a vast number of characters to choose from, and each can branch out to 2 intermediate classes, and then 3 advanced classes. Classes come with a predetermined set of skills that you can customize with skill points gained by leveling up. As skills become more powerful, they will cost more points, so some level ups will be just plain stat improvements. Levels come relatively quick though, because encounters are very frequent. Way too frequent. Encounter rate should be half, or even a third of the current, with experience to adjust accordingly. Combat at first starts simple, but then becomes engaging, with monsters using buffs, different kind of attack spells, and even heal their allies. Monsters have the same abilities as your potential party members, so mummies and pharaohs will dance, don't ask, I don't know, matrioskas will summon dolls, others will increase physical or magical defense. You'll start to prioritize enemies able to cast powerful area spells or even one-hit KO party members, using the buff skills to soften up large enemy groups. However, even against newer powerful enemies, combat can and will degenerate in using your spellcaster's most powerful area spell to quickly burn through enemy lines, while others clean up stragglers. Elemental attacks, either from spellcasters or the handful of skills other classes have, is a must. Simple physical attacks won't cut for most of the enemies. Another drawback is that status changes aren't that detrimental. I've never found necessary to cure ailments unless absolutely necessary, like a poison character with only few hit points left. Monster sprites can be incredibly large, with those on the front line hiding the rear, sometimes almost completely. Sprites themselves do not bring anything to the combat system itself, they don't show if a monster is casting or its health is low, but more proper spacing and scaling for large monster groups would have been better. Like all dungeon crawlers, you reach a point where your party can pretty much just spam attacks and get through everything. The only real restriction is the amount of items you can carry, forcing you to get out of dungeons to unload your inventory. With 5 party members and the correct choice of skills, you can complete dungeons in one go. Spellcasters gain the ability to recover some of their TPs, and recovery can be augmented by passive and active maid skills. The downside is that maids aren't effective fighters until reaching high levels, and you see, the class and party composition is so deep that I really enjoy it, but the combat fails to fully exploit it. All in all, the combat system is bearable in its simplicity, at least it's not chained to artificial constraints like in Ray Gigant. And it's not that developers didn't try. Turns are based on a character's base and action speed, and that's further modified by equipped weapons and skills. Spells take some time to cast and can be interrupted with enough damage to the caster. It is a good system in theory. It's not fully developed, probably because it tries too much. This is something common with all Sting games. They try hard, really hard, and end up short of their vision, often forgetting to explain important aspects to the player. Dungeon Travelers 2 features a secret classroom where a maid explains some aspects of the game. Such explanations always cover things you have already learned, like the delay in spellcasting that comes up as a topic during the 3rd or 4th hour of play. Some aspects are forgotten altogether, like characters' motivation and how it can influence things. I first learned about this when a penguin selling ice cream popped up in a dungeon, and noticed that the purchase threat recovered HPs, TPs, and brought the party motivation to normal. Dungeon Travelers 2 loves to explain game mechanics in a witty way, with the aforementioned maid and a couple of a penguin and bear adventurers. These characters like to break the fourth wall and are the best written part of the game. I found them genuinely funny. Unfortunately, they always come late and never go as deep as required, not causing players frustration, but leaving them in the dark for no good reason. Again, I cannot stress this enough. There are some strong foundations here, strong enough to rival great crawlers like Grimrock or Etrian Odyssey, but they aren't fully exploited. For me, this is almost more frustrating than a shallow combat system, although I'll admit that battles didn't turn out overly boring as in other titles. They lack tension, for sure, but are good enough to keep the interest going. Dungeon design starts out basic, but from around the 5th chapter it becomes incredibly complex, and not in a good way. Almost every single tile in a dungeon is live, meaning you can walk into it, creating a maze of corridors and one-tile-wide rooms. As the game goes on, dungeons get multiple floors with multiple shortcuts, stairs to go up and down multiple times to progress, one-way doors, pitfalls, buttons and levers to open doors, dark areas where you can see the map, invisible passageways, color teleporters within a floor, or teleporters between floors. Re-entering a dungeon requires to study the map to first check where you need to go, mentally backtrack from that position to the entrance, and then start moving. There is no way to customize the map, like different color tiles or markers, which would have been great in such complex mazes. With the Vita's touchscreen, it would have also been very easy to implement such features. Dungeons are placed in different locations, keeping visual variety high. However, within a dungeon, there are only a small number of graphical tiles, and due to how dungeons are designed, a corner will look as any other. Some dungeons feature very simple effects, like slow-moving tree branches, but the Vita can do much more. Dungeons are relatively plain to the eye. Trap tiles can be detected by high-ranked scouts, but there are no visual cues to them. You can encounter vendors while exploring, but those just pop up at random. The only visual elements are chests, switches and ladders. The monsters you encounter are of the scantily clad Musume quality, of course. They are represented by a simple, static sprite, with the quality of their design varying greatly. Different monsters come from different artists, and while this creates visual variety, it also creates disparity. It's like not every monster belongs to the game, and some are better designed or drawn than the others. Monsters are sealed by Fried at the end of the battle, and bosses receive their own risque illustration. Sealed monsters are used to create books that give characters special abilities related to the monster type, and unused books can be sold. Selling these books is your major source of income, and soon you'll be swimming in gold, as items are only really needed during boss encounters. If you create your party correctly though, even restorative items become useless and you'll be stockpiling them in your stash. One thing that Dungeon Travelers 2 completely fails in is menu structure. Equipment must be identified first, so you go to the shop. To equip items you exit the shop, go to the guild, select equipment and then the character. To sell unused stuff, you either go to the shop or place them in storage, then select the item you want to sell. You can't select multiple item types, and the shop resets the item type to all every time you sell something, making browsing through items a pain. Again, convoluted menus are some sort of trademark of Steam games, and here the problem is exacerbated by the number of things you can do. Dungeon Travelers 2 features a good number of events involving the various girls. Events are triggered by the story or your choices. When exploring dungeons, characters can say something, picked from random quotes, and this can lead to some funny combinations. Dialogues are also triggered by using a character skill. Events with full illustration happen outside the dungeon and are usually related to the story. These don't make much sense, and are mostly done for fan service, like Alicia training in secret, outside the library, in her underwear. They might not make sense, but they revolve around fine ladies showing off their goods, so I'm fine with them as long as I don't pay attention to what's written. The US version has been censored, but not as heavily as Criminal Girls. Changes include addition of clothes to some monsters and removal of details in certain illustrations. To close, Dungeon Travelers 2 is a nice dungeon crawler. Some of its features have great depth, but the combat doesn't make full use of them. Once again, Steam puts too many game mechanics and fail to fully exploit and sometimes explain them, but I can't say that I didn't have my share of fun with Dungeon Travelers 2. The game's biggest problem is the overly complex dungeon design that doesn't appreciate how empty spaces can make the difference between good level design to just unrestrained chaos. I'd say that this is for players with a moderate knowledge of dungeon crawlers, mostly due to dungeon design. Experienced players will be probably more frustrated about what the game could have been, rather than being bored by it. Totally worth a look. I hope you have enjoyed this review and you'll stick around for more. Briareos Kerensky, over and out.